Okay. Hey. What's up, good people? Hopefully, y'all doing very, very, very well out there in the real world. It is your humblest of hosts, Soul Expression. Pardon me, not Soul Obsession. Soul Expression indeed. And I'm here to ask you to like the video. Okay? Before you know what we're talking about, before you know why, I want you to move your mouse or your finger, have it hover above the like button, click or tap once, and then let the rest unfold how it will. Okay? And that's especially important in these first like 10 minutes or so. Um, but, of course, I'm not going to make you do it. I'm just going to ask nicely. And subscribe to the channels, right? In a Storyteller channel, the ufuluchild channel. We got really, really great content for you already there, available for free, as well as coming in the future. I, for one, am very happy to get into today's presentation, as today is not just an episode, but another one of my presentations. And we are going to get back into the school system. Why are we going to revisit the school system so many times on this channel? Well, it's extremely important to understanding how we got to where we are now with the level of apathy and the lack of a level of care that we have for one another and one another's suffering, to understand the school system, how it was designed, what exactly, is the like issues that we should tackle first, second, third when we try to either reform the school system or reform our way of teaching our own children at home. Understanding what to do, and like I said, how we got here has a lot to do with understanding the school system. So, without further ado, please remember, if you are here, then you are here and in for real conversations. Okay, we look at the good, we look at the bad, we look at the ugly, and we look at the great. We're going to have some real conversations regarding natural law, religion, money, anarchy, and how mankind is manipulated by forces that do not have our best interest at heart because they are extremely evil. Now, I say we talk about religion. We do not bash faith systems here on this channel. We are not spending our time criticizing and calling stupid people that have a religion or a faith system. As a human being, you are going to and you must orient yourself through some kind of lens and some kind of direction. And that means you're going to have beliefs. You can't go through life without them. What we are doing is simply examining the psychological affects and effects of the stories that we have the most faith in, the stories that we have the most stake in, and how these stories help shape society. Now, that examination, of course, sits right alongside an honest look at the current human condition. The current human condition, as I had discussed it on my channel, is slavery. Government is slavery, indeed. And the question that we have to keep coming back to is what can actually be improved with a proper understanding of the inner storyteller and how it works. Now, if any of that makes you a little uneasy, makes you a little angry, or makes you uncomfortable, please understand and be reassured that although you are super duper encouraged to stay and subscribe, you are, of course, also welcome to leave if you so choose, but only after you like the video. Okay. And with that being said, good people, we are here to talk about the factory model. The factory model is the model of our current schooling. And it is something that we have to really and truly understand in order to understand ourselves. So let me make sure that I have everything ready for you. Here we go. The factory model, how they rewired your inner storyteller. Why good grades are just obedience training in disguise. Also, good people, please, for me, let me know in the comments if this text is super duper blurry. If it is, it's a bit of a problem. It's not the biggest problem because you really only need like to see the, what do they call, headings clearly. But I'd like it if you could read like this, for instance. But I'm not going to wait for that comment to come through. I am going to go ahead and continue. Before we actually get into the presentation, I have to give you a number. And that number is 80%. This right here is the literacy rate for white American men in the year 1800, before any mandatory government school laws or compulsory school laws existed anywhere in the country. Before Horace Mann, before Rockefeller and Carnegie, before the General Education Board, before any of it, people learned in decentralized ways. We learned from family. We learned from church. We learned from apprenticeship masters. We learned from community lending libraries. And of course, we learned from working alongside people who knew things and passed them on. And that's just the basic way of learning. You learn from people who know things and pass these things that they know on to you. So education happened every day, but it happened organically. It was decentralized. It was voluntary. And it was adapted to the actual life that the learner was living, the actual environment that they were living. Now, then, in 1852 or so, and we're coming up to this 1910 number, but in 1852, Massachusetts, of all places, passed the first compulsory law for education. And within 66 years of that first compulsory education law in Massachusetts, every single state in America had followed. And by 1918, attending school wasn't just encouraged, it was then mandatory. If you missed too many days, then your parents could be fined or even jailed, which, of course, on this channel, we call that caged. Your parents could be fined or indeed caged. Now, let me come back and check. You can only see the heading, but I'm glad you can see the headings clearly. So this right here says many high school graduates could decode words but couldn't understand a newspaper editorial. They could not follow complex written instructions, and they could not critically analyze a written argument. They'd been taught to memorize and recite, but not to comprehend and evaluate, not to actually use what we call today brain power. And for further context, here's what happened to the literacy rates after 1918, because we've had compulsory schooling. If we go 1918 to 2018, 100 years. After 100 years of mandatory schooling, researchers found that many high school graduates, just like I said, cannot understand complex written instruction, cannot comprehend a story from beginning to end, and had been taught to memorize and recite instead of comprehend and evaluate. Okay, so these little red boxes are going to basically support things that are in my script. Now, what was demanded by those at the top, those designing this school system? 3 phrases give the answer to that, and those 3 phrases are more school, more money, and less thinking. Now ask yourself, what story do you tell yourself about why that may be? That more school, more money, and less thinking was their answer. More importantly, who gave you that story? Because that is what today's episode and presentation is all about. Because the official story is this: America needed educated citizens for democracy. We needed educated populace for democracy to work, right? We needed to teach children reading, writing, and arithmetic so they could participate in civic life for a better future. That's the story. And it sounds right, to be honest. It sounds completely legit. It sorts perfectly into good and, safe drawer, the good and safe compartment in your mind, the idea of schooling. But here's where what they don't teach you in those same schools. The people who designed the American public school systems were not educators, not in the slightest. They were industrialists, factory owners, occultists, men who had very specific problems to solve when it came to manufacturing consumer demand for things. Men who had a very specific problem to solve that they had, and the problem that they had to solve had nothing to do with creating actual independent thinkers with a creative edge. America in the late 1840s looked nothing like the country we know today. As said before, 80% of Americans lived on farms or small towns and could read. Most children learned by apprenticeship, working alongside their parents or local craftsmen. A boy might spend his teenage years learning blacksmithing, coppering, or surveying. Girls learned domestic management, food preservation, and often medical skills from their mothers. Then, the Industrial Revolution arrived, and massive textile mills in Massachusetts, steel plants in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, running blast furnaces 24 hours a day, meat packing operations in Chicago on assembly lines. All of these different operations needed hundreds of workers showing up at the exact same time, doing repetitive tasks, and following strict rules for 10 or 12 hours straight, 6 days a week, if those at the top were going to line their pockets from the revenue generated when all of these things were suddenly made available for mass distribution, right? If we were going to serve them and stop serving, the actual community and local environment, or even the global environment, but just serve them, then they needed to have us work in a certain way with the machines that were designed a certain way in the factories that were built to create a certain environment. And American workers in the 1840s were terrible at factory environments. Farmers were used to setting their own pace. When the soil was too wet to plow, you just did something else. You controlled the rhythm and you worked in harmony with nature. The idea of a factory bell, ding, controlling when you started, when you ate lunch, even when you used the bathroom, this was completely foreign to the American worker at the time. Early factory owners faced catastrophic turnover. Turnover, of course, means people leaving the job and needing to hire somebody else to fill their spot. Workers would show up for a few weeks, get their pay, and disappear back into the countryside. Some saved specifically to start their own businesses and never work for someone else again. This is what I'm doing. Even worse, American workers organized. They talked about wages and conditions amongst each other. They coordinated strikes and work stoppages. right? They demanded changes. Labor organizing was growing rapidly between the 1830s and 40s, and the idea that workers could collectively negotiate terrified the industrialist class. And that's when the Prussian model caught their eye. Let me see something real quick. Make sure I'm still on track. Okay, good. So that's when the Prussian school model caught their attention. Prussia had created something unprecedented, and he did so as far back as the 1760s. Can you believe how long this game has been going on? Under King Frederick the Great, mind you, a state-controlled education system that took children as young as 6 and put them into classrooms organized by age, not ability and not interest. These children sat in rows and followed strict schedules. They memorized what they were told from the authority at the head of the room, and they learned to obey without any questions. King Frederick the Great, mind you, wanted men who would march when ordered and die without hesitation. The classroom became his training ground. Sit when told, stand when told, speak when given permission. Sound familiar? Put your hand down. Accept that your role is to obey. Prussian schools used corporal punishment liberally. They emphasized repetition over understanding. And there was always one correct answer found in one correct form of finding answers. And it came from the authority at the front of the room. American industrialists saw the perfect training program for their need for factory workers, for the demand for their factory workers. Their own demand, mind you. Horace Mann, often called the father of American public education, traveled to Prussia in 1843. He spent weeks visiting classrooms, observing methods, taking detailed notes. When he returned, he spent the next decade evangelizing the model. Mann sold it publicly as the great equalizer. But read his actual reports carefully. Mann wasn't talking about critical thinking or creativity, or even helping children discover their own talents. He was obsessed with order, punctuality, uniformity, and of course, above all else, respect for authority. He praised how Prussian teachers maintained absolute control over their classrooms. He admired how students sat in perfect silence, unless permitted to speak. Horace Mann, was funded by wealthy industrialists who needed workers that would show up on time, stand in one place for hours, perform tasks without complaint, and accept wages without organizing against the leader. That's the building that was built. And now we need to talk about the inner storyteller connection, or what was installed in the inner storyteller when this was implemented around the world. The first thing the inner storyteller is trained to do inside that building is to distrust its own intuition in favor of the approved narrative. Right? You are taught to see your own inclinations and creative powers as distractions from the approved narrative. Your gut says something is wrong, but the authority says it's fine, and the enforcement follows the authority. And you get 12 years of conditioning, mandatory, that teaches you to file your gut instincts into the doubt drawer in the inner storyteller compartment filing cabinets. Your own gut voice, your inner voice, is filed into the doubt drawer. and you are taught to trust the voice that comes from the authority at the front of the room. And that is the root of the confusion lesson that Gato talked about, that we discussed on this channel. And it was the first most important thing that the system needed to accomplish. Let me, boom. The Prussian model and the observer is the next section. And here's what they actually are doing to the child. You see, in the terms of the quantum physics that we studied together on this channel not too many episodes ago, in quantum terms, the inner storyteller is the observer. Okay, it's the mechanism that collapses the infinite possibilities into a single definite reality for an individual as well as a society, a given society. A child is born with its mechanisms intact, working properly. A child is born curious, reaching, receiving, soaking things in, and collapsing meaning from everything around them in a natural and constant manner. The Prussian classroom systematically dismantles that process by forcing a child to sit still, raise a hand, and wait for permission before speaking, and move when the bell tells them to. You are forcing and training the inner storyteller of said child to wait for external signals before collapsing a thought into reality, into mental reality, or what have you, an action. You are teaching the most fundamental mechanism of human consciousness, that its natural impulse, whether to move or to wonder about things or to reach towards meaning, is somehow dangerous, and that the only safe reality is the one provided or guided by the authority figure, again, in the front of the room. Do you understand how deep that goes? Do you truly understand how hard it is to unlearn that? That isn't just obedience training. That's observer training. You are reprogramming the thing inside a human being that produces their experience of reality. And you're doing it before they are old enough to know what's happening, before they have any framework to resist it, and before they have any name for the mechanism being tampered with. Tensi writes, wow, it makes sense with the Industrial Revolution, how it impacted the community because making factories, the prisons are more efficient. And this is where we learned to ignore our own natural rhythms. Big impact on health and connecting with the divine, in my opinion. Yes, indeedio. Oh, okay, cool. I thought it was gonna stop sharing my screen for a second. But yeah, great comments, by the way. Thank you for that. So, again, you're reprogramming the thing inside the human being that produces their experience of reality, and doing it before they're old enough to know what's happening and before they have a framework to resist it. You're doing it also before they have a name for the mechanism that's being tampered with, the inner storyteller, before they have a concept that they can step back and observe and see if something natural is occurring or if something unnatural is occurring inside them with your manipulations. It's an ingenious model. Now, something even worse and kind of darker is the McGuffey readers. McGuffey readers is specific curriculum material that we're going to talk about right now. So let's talk about the McGuffey readers and the death of authentic meaning making. Okay. The curriculum reveals everything. Early public schools focused heavily on rote memorization, recitation, obedience drills, and the like. Children learn to sit for long periods, fighting their natural urge to move. They learn to raise their hands and wait, sometimes for minutes. Mathematics focused only on computation and following prescribed methods, to the point that a student who arrived at the correct answer, but through unconventional reasoning, was often marked wrong. Not because the answer was wrong, but because they hadn't followed the approved method for arriving at the answer. This is still true in today's math classes. The McGuffey readers, the primary reading text used in American schools through the late 1800s, contained story after story about children who succeeded by following instructions and failed when they questioned authority. And this was given in the mandatory curriculum in the mandatory schools that Congress made laws around, right? Imposed by the government. Because you have to remember, good people, government school is the seminary for the religion of government itself. So, the McGuffey readers contained story after story about children who succeeded by following instructions and failed when they questioned authority. This, of course, is not accidental content. This is programming. This is the curriculum doing its job. The stories being read are about obedience. The lessons being absorbed are about obedience. The inner storyteller is being handed a lens. Compliance leads to reward. Questioning leads to punishment. Now, here's what this does to the core function inside one's meaning maker, right? Inside the inner storyteller. The core function being basically the sorting function, the association mechanism, right? The inner storyteller's job is to make meaning, to connect dots in ways unique to the person doing the connecting through your unique personhood lens. But the system tends to punish that quite directly. You see, if you solve the math problem differently, you did it wrong. You are wrong. If you write a poem that doesn't rhyme, you are failing. If you arrive at the right answer through the wrong path, then the path is what's graded, not the answer. Another thing that's very important is disciplinary action is affected by this. We have concepts such as it doesn't matter who started it, you're both getting in trouble because you both caused a disturbance. When in fact, that is moral relativism. That is it serves those at the top of the industrialist hierarchy by way of you learn never to cause a disturbance, even if someone is provoking and disrespecting you. Right? What they are doing is replacing personal meaning with standardized meaning. They are teaching the inner storyteller that truth is a static object handed down from the front of the room or from the authority in the room, not a living process generated from inner understanding. And once that replacement is complete, once they can invert the meaning of truth, something shifts almost permanently inside the mind. Now, again, neuroscience tells us that neuroplasticity is on our side when it comes to our ability to change what we believe. But when something is kind of locked in almost permanently, it gets very hard to change those neural pathways. Even if you can rhetorically say something, your neural pathways may dictate that you still act in service of the evildoers when there's some pressure. It depends. Maybe you have a very strong will. Regardless, what happens is you stop asking, quote, what does this mean to me? And you start asking, quote, what is the test going to want as the right answer? What is the test going to demand of me that I'm going to take on this information? And so the meaning maker stops creating meaning and just starts assigning meaning that comes from authority. It starts performing meaning for an audience that will grade it. That, my friends, is called intellectual dependency. And as we discussed on this channel when we went over John Taylor Gatto's work, Gatto named it as one of the 7 hidden lessons that the system actually teaches our children. Right? Did I miss one? Where's the... Here, confusion, class position, meaning your position in socioeconomic class, indifference, emotional dependency, intellectual dependency, provisional self-esteem, and constant surveillance, right? But let's go back. Now, after Reconstruction, Black Americans built real schools. Rockefeller replaced them. This is, well, it's not rage bait, but you might get mad. Segment 4, this section is called Rockefeller, Carnegie, and the Two-Tiered System. In 1902, John D. Rockefeller created the General Education Board with an initial donation of $1 million in 1902. You can't even imagine $1 million in 1902. Over the following decades, he poured $180 million into the General Education Board, or roughly $6 billion in today's money. Okay, and remember, $1 billion is way farther away from $1 million than $1 is to $1 million. Okay, because you have to get to 1 million, and you have to get to 10 million, and you have to get to 100 million, and then you have to do that 10 times to get to 1 billion. He gave 6. All right, so that's $80 million back then, roughly $6 billion in today's money. You can't even imagine. The board's stated mission was to promote education in the rural South where schools were scarce. Okay, he needed to target the areas where the cities were not affecting the population how he wanted them to and how he needed them to if the Industrial Revolution was going to continue at its current pace. His internal documents say something very peculiar. Frederick Gates, Rockefeller's advisor and the board's first chairman, wrote a 1913 policy document that they didn't want to make philosophers, poets, doctors, lawyers, or statesmen. Right? So they say explicitly, we don't want thinkers. What industry needed was workers who could, again, follow instructions, operate the machinery, perform the repetitive tasks reliably, and do so without developing ambitions above their station. And Gates wrote, they wanted to teach people to do a thing in a perfect way that their fathers and mothers were doing in an imperfect way. This is what they said. The farmer's son should be a better farmer, not an engineer. Which is insane, right? The farmer's son should be a better farmer, not an engineer. A factory worker's daughter should be a better domestic servant, not a teacher. The goal was to improve, end quote. The goal was to improve efficiency with existing social classes, not enable mobility between the classes. And so let's stay on the South for a moment, because this is where the design of the school system becomes impossible to look away from. After the Civil War ended in 1865, there was a brief period called the Reconstruction, right? During this period, Formerly enslaved Black Americans built their own schools, and these were not industrial schools. These were real institutions where people learned to read complex text, studied history and political science through a philosophical lens, learned advanced mathematics at young ages. Black literacy climbed from roughly 10% in 1860 to over 50% in 1900. We were outpacing white America by a lot, largely due to two things at once. One, we were educating ourselves outside of the Rockefeller Carnegie school system. And two, we had come from a place that made us so mentally, you know, hungry for information that we as a people were kind of in our infancy when it came to modern information, what was modern at that time, information. So we were, smart. We were going super hard with our academics, despite, the lynch mobs and all of the separate but equal laws and blatant discrimination and racism that was afoot at that time. So these school also, I just want to say, shout out to Thomas Sowell. You should read Thomas Sowell's work. Thomas Sowell was a very good writer when it comes to American history. Now, these schools, the Black schools, taught the Constitution and their rights under it. They taught business skills. They taught people to read contracts so they couldn't be cheated. Black political participation was surging. Black men were elected to Congress, to state legislators, to local offices throughout the South. Black-owned businesses even flourished. We all heard about Black Wall Street. And this terrified the industrial landowning class, pardon me. When Rockefeller and Carnegie stepped in with their education funding, things started to change. And they started to change for the worst under the guise of being more equal with the white American counterparts. The schools that they built were not like the ones the Black communities had created on their own, Rockefeller and Carnegie. These industrial schools taught just enough reading to follow written instruction, focused on manual labor, agricultural work for boys, domestic services for girls, any education that might lead to questioning the racial and economic hierarchy was obviously deliberately excluded from the Rockefeller and Carnegie funded schools in the South. W.E.B. Du Bois, or Dubois, Harvard doctor, studied in Berlin. He looked at industrial education and named it plainly as a trap. He said Black communities needed classical education for their most capable members to become leaders, teachers, doctors, lawyers, etc. However, industrial education did the opposite. It kept entire populations trapped in just enough skill, just enough literacy to be useful to a few people at the top of the food chain, but not enough to challenge the system or create a new system altogether. Du Bois said it directly. He said the battle wasn't in the teaching methods, it was about power. Who gets to think? Who gets to lead? Who is allowed to question the economic system? That question was being answered deliberately with $6 billion in today's money in policy documents written by the men whose names are on university buildings across the country. And what it installed in the collective inner storyteller of an entire population is this: your destiny is already written. You are but a cog in the machine. Your potential is not infinite. Your worth depends on how well you can fit into the slot given to you by your environment and by the authority at the head of the room. And that, of course, is provisional self-esteem. And it was put there on purpose. Now let's talk about the bell. I cannot imagine a conversation about the school system without mentioning school bell. Ever since I brought it up a few episodes ago, it's been on my mind. And when Big Sis, Cynthia Mitchell over at Affirm Life Daily, make sure y'all go follow her channel, brought it up or was talking with Aaron about the school system in her most recent episode. I even asked the question in the comments. I was like, what effect do you think the school bell has on the students? And they had some great responses, but basically they pointed right to the factory. They said, there's a factory bell. It's just like exactly what they were looking to create. Is somebody who would be receptive to following something like a bell, a school bell. So let's get into it. I want to spend a moment on the bell because people really underestimate the psychological affects and effects of this machine, of this part of the machine, pardon me. Factory bells had signaled shift changes since the early Industrial Revolution. They conditioned workers to stop immediately and transition to the next task or to lunch or even to the bathroom. The bell was not a courtesy announcement. It was a neurological trigger built into the body of the workforce through repetition and into the inner storyteller of the workers. Schools adopted the identical system. A bell rang to start class, another to end it. Students learned to interrupt their work midstream and shift into something completely different because the bell said so. They learned to move from room to room only when permitted. They asked permission to use the bathroom, teaching the nervous system that even basic bodily functions were subject to authority approval. Now, I want you to notice what exactly is being trained here, because it's not just behavior. The relationship between the human being and their own time is being disrupted, inverted. One's own body, one's own rhythm was given to authority. And this training persists, of course, into adulthood in ways most people never really examine. Millions of people structure their entire lives around setting alarms, calendar events, and timers, especially timers set by others. We have alarm clocks, we have our work schedule, we have meeting times, lunch breaks. The idea of working until something is finished or of following a natural energy rhythm feels very foreign to people trained from age 4.5 to obey the bell. When you feel anxious without a schedule, when you feel lost without an external structure, when you need imagination but can't tap into it, when you need someone else to tell you when to start and when to stop, that is not your personality or your authentic self showing up in a mysterious way. That is 12 years or more of neurological conditioning doing exactly what it was designed to do inside of you. The inner storyteller has been trained to believe that without external control, reality will collapse. The industrialists are scared. They're scared of your freedom, right? And that's why they'll never allow you, to experience it. So we got to talk about the pre-factory model and what it produced, because it didn't produce these 7 lessons, right? Confusion. Let's revisit these real quick before I get back to my script. These are this is the 7 things your child is actually being taught, as told by John Taylor Gatto. First is confusion, right? Everything is taught out of context. The unrelating of everything is the model of how they teach it. The inner storyteller learns that the world cannot be understood without an authority explaining it. And so you're confused about everything. You run into a new issue, a new problem. Instead of your initial gut instinct to try and figure it out, your initial gut instinct is to call or to go on YouTube or to ask someone externally how to do a thing, right? And I am guilty of that 100,000%. 2, class position. Know your place and stay there with a smile. The grading hierarchy enforces a social order that most students will never escape. The class structure is reproduced in a classroom daily. You can walk in a room and know when you're surrounded by A students. You can walk in a room and know when you're surrounded by D and F students. You just kind of know, right? Former students, pardon me. A room of adults that were former A or former D and F students. You know when you're surrounded by you know it. You just know. You don't know, but you know. Shout out to Candace Owens. The third hidden lesson is indifference, right? The bell makes everything matter until it doesn't. The inner storyteller learns nothing worth sustained investment. You stop caring about the information because the bell says so. Emotional dependency, right? Worth and direction come from the authority at the front of the room. The inner storyteller permanently outsources its own emotional validation. Same with intellectual dependency. You wait for the expert. There's always one right answer from the textbook or from the teacher, and only one way to find the right answer. Never from your own reasoning and never from your intuition. Your thinking is insufficient or a distraction by design. Next, we have provisional self-esteem that we just went over. Your worth is assigned externally and can be revoked externally. Confidence requires constant re-earning from the outside source. And I'm reminded of, if y'all haven't seen the Lego movie, there's this scene in the Lego movie, the first one, where Bad Cop, the lackey of the adversary named President Business, Bad Cop finally, towards the climax of the movie, he finally captures the main character and turns him into President Business. And President Business turns around, looks at him and says, "Acceptable work, Bad Cop." And like, he's been trashing him the whole movie, and he finally does the thing, and he's like, "Acceptable work." Right? Provisional self-esteem. You get your self-esteem from me, and it can be revoked at any time. And then constant surveillance. You're always being watched. There's nowhere to hide. The inner storyteller internalizes the watcher and begins surveilling itself so that authority does not really have to. Very, 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 very depressing stuff. So here we go. The school system did have to work for the propagandists. Before I get to the final point I want to make, please consider this. Thomas Edison attended school for only a few months of his life. Now, as a well-read on Black history, former history major who went to, Morehouse, but I did not graduate, so I don't claim to be a Morehouse man, but I did go to Morehouse for 4 years, and I was a history major. I was told that Thomas Edison may have, colluded to steal some of his patents and claim inventions that he did not actually invent, and that his Black helping hands actually invented, who worked with him, and they didn't really have a right to challenge a white man for what he was submitting to the patent office or whatever, right? But let's pretend that the mainstream story regarding Edison is true, because that's what's important to make the point we're not dealing directly with the historicity of who actually invented what. So I just want to put that aside for right now to make a point, but I don't want to dismiss it as something that current history buffs should look into. So, pretending that he invented all of his stuff, through his genius, Thomas Edison only attended school for a few months of his life. His teacher called him addled, right? Addled, let's look up the definition. Addled, copy, define addled. Being confused, muddled, or unable to think clearly. Originally referring to a rotten, unhatched egg, the term now is used metaphorically to describe fuzzy, foggy, or disordered mental states. Okay, that's what his teacher called him. His mother pulled him out and taught him at home. He was homeschooled. He went on to hold over 1,000 patents and built entire industries. Next, we have the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers never finished high school. They had no credentials. They had no government permission from any institution. They saw a project, a problem, and imagined a solution. They started in a bicycle shop, right, on a beach. And through failed attempts and relentless curiosity, and without waiting for the bell, right, by finishing their tasks, they helped travel a great bit, right? George Washington Carver, this was somebody born into slavery. He taught himself through direct observation of nature, not government school, not even government-approved homeschooling. He developed hundreds of products from peanuts and sweet potatoes alone and transformed Southern agriculture. But his classroom was the field, was being out in nature. Unfortunately, at the beginning of his life, in slavery, but also, just in nature, being outside and being sensitive enough to pick things up in a way that results in real progress for his local environment and what ended up being for the whole world. These men did not have the factory model trained into their bodies and bones for 12, if not 18 years of schooling. They had the thing that the factory model was actually designed to destroy, which is a free forming inner storyteller that resulted in one trusting their own observations, following their own curiosities, finishing projects, whether they turn out to be wild goose chases or not. And they didn't require permission to collapse a new reality out of the available field. I was supposed to be on this slide for a little while. Thomas Edison, Wright brothers, and George Washington Carver right here. By the mid-1900s, that spirit found in these three examples was fading. More Americans worked for large corporations doing specialized tasks that they had no control over, and the economy shifted from a nation of independent producers to a nation of employees who waited to be told what to do or needed credentials before attempting anything. Basically, the system worked, and it worked very well. I want to remind you that John Taylor Gatto taught in New York City public schools for 30 years. He was named New York City Teacher of the Year 3 consecutive years and New York State Teacher of the Year in 1991. He used his acceptance speech to not celebrate the institution, but instead indict it publicly. He eventually resigned in the pages of the Wall Street Journal writing that he was no longer willing to hurt children by forcing them through a system designed to make them dependent and compliant. He spent the rest of his life documenting what you just heard about the school system's design and those 7 hidden lessons that he broke down for us, right? And here's the single most important thing that I really want you to take from Gato and from this podcast's coverage of the school system in general. I want you to take that the system is not broken, right? It's working exactly as it's designed to work. Which means you are not broken. This is what I'm trying to, my brain was really searching for these words. This should be good news, because if the system was failing and we are how we are, something should be wrong with us. But the system is working, okay? And that means that you are not broken. It means that you didn't know that the system was designed to work this way. And now that you do know, now you are empowered to make different choices. The problem is not your child. The problem is not your community, right? The problem is not your people. The problem is the story that was handed to the inner storyteller before it was old enough to ask about who wrote it, before it had any framework or experience to evaluate what was being installed, and before it knew a framework like this one could exist, before it knew that people that would design such a catastrophe existed and could sleep well at night doing this to populations, well before somebody could understand the depth of the harm being done. The inner storyteller is already being trained to go along with this program because it associates going along with this program with good work, safety, a means to get self-esteem and get praised by those with the perceived authority to validate someone, right? All of these things getting programmed into the kid well before they know anything about the world of adults. You know, something I always like to bring up when I think about these things is the etymology of the word government, right? The etymology of the word government is not a coincidence. It breaks down as you have gubernar. Let me see if I can get an image real quick. Gubernare and mens mentis. Go ahead. Let me see if I can get a image here. Here we go. Why is it so small? That one's a little bit bigger. Okay, how do I actually view this thing? Okay, it's gonna open in Facebook. Okay, well we're gonna open it in Facebook here. Let's share this tab instead, real fast. Hopefully y'all can see that. Government, derived from the Latin verb gubernare or gubernaro, or guberno. There was no V in Latin. Latin has no V, so it's either a B or a P for in substitution for the letter V. Okay, so gubernare, meaning to control, right? And then mentis, government, right? Environment, government, empowerment. All of that means mind, Okay. So to control the mind, government, govern, control, steer, the mind, mind control. They made it one word. Okay. Now let me go back to my little, where's my, oh, here it is, presentation. Mind control. Okay. They named it in plain sight. Somebody put it in the language itself. They sat around a office table in the linguistics department of whatever, the English language creation linguistics department, and they said, what two concepts are we going to put together for, to point to the entity that rules over them, the population? What are we going to call, if we're not going to say king anymore, and we're going to have this other kind of system, what are we going to call the system in English? What two concepts are we going to put together to make a word to describe that entity? Oh, I know, somebody said. Let's use mind control because that's what it is, right? And obviously, the school that bears the word public, public means government. So government school means a school for mind control. Okay, public means government. Government means mind control. Public school means mind control school, or a school for mind control. And you put your kid in there for 12 years, which is okay. You didn't know. Now you know. Take your kid out. Here's the thing. You can't fix the factory from inside the factory. You can do that when the factory is very small. But when there's 13,000 locations of the same factory across the world, and they all have to work the same way and cut their fries the same way, you're not going to go inside, become a manager after working your way up the ladder, and change anything. It's just not going to happen. It's illogical and unreasonable to think anything else. Oh, and while I was on while I was on the topic of government school, I wanted to point to the slide real quick. So the words that they choose were not accidents. I also want to go back here, see if there's any other comments. Lots of other comments. I love it. The words that they chose were not accidents, right? Every term triggers some sort of sorting mechanism of the inner storyteller, some way that we put the word into the association box of dangerous or safe or authority approved or not approved by the authority. The drawer determines whether the content gets examined or filed away to never be seen again. These are the containers that they like to hide. Standardized sounds like uniformity, sounds like safety. It really is obedience, right? Accountability. It triggers blame, sometimes shame, fear, external control, and surveillance, accountability. Meritocracy. Meritocracy is this word. Mediocrity is where we all land when we, when we design society how we have it today. The word meritocracy triggers fairness, equal opportunity, and hard work, whereas we really don't have a meritocracy, right? They disguise a corporatocracy for a meritocracy, and therefore make us feel like we're less than, right? It hides tracking and class rigidity, class meaning socioeconomic class. Oh, that's fine. Built-in bias and rigged tests, right? Meritocracy is not what we really have. And then the word curriculum triggers structure, triggers order, expertise, and legitimacy. But it hides, there's one size fits all. Who approved this thinking? It hides the this is the only narrative that is acceptable, right? So wanted to bring those words to your attention and remind you the system is not broken. It's working exactly as it is designed. Okay. Which means you are not broken. Right. Now, as I was saying, the work is not to fix the factory because the factory is doing exactly what it's designed to do. So what do we do? What do we do? Well, first, you got to learn how to trust your gut, man. Trust your gut. That's what this heading says. Trust your gut. Okay? When you feel something is wrong, when the anxiety shows up, and when the confusion arrives, that is something inside of you trying to wake up from long conditioning. It's the true observer, right, near the I am presence, trying to speak to you and realign you with the nature, your true nature, and realign you with the harmony that you seek to be in with the universe and with the world around you. The system trained you to sort that inner signal in the doubt compartment. Don't. Learn to listen to it. Follow your gut. Candace talks about that all the time. Learn how to question the container, right? And again, when we use container in these contexts, it's simply to say question the frame that they give you to think in, right? The boundaries that they set around your thought processes. Question that container. When someone says that there is only one way to do something, when someone says there's only one way to do something, this is the standard. You have to do it this way. You have to ask them, well, says who? And why? And is it legit? Right? Is there more than one way to do it? And if so, is there more than one safe way and proper way to do it? And if there is, why is there such a container, being clung to here? Who benefits from that story, from the story of the safe container? Is it true that there's only one way? Or is the policy designed to keep you and your peers in your socioeconomic place? Question all the containers, right? Not just tasks that you can do at work, but is there another way to go about governance and self-governance? Is there another way to go about protecting each other's rights? Is there another way to go about mass distribution of products? Is there another way to go about feeding ourselves? Question the containers. Third, we have to become the author of our own stories, man. We cannot continue to allow external forces to write our stories for us by force, under threat. We cannot allow that to keep happening, right? Walk without a destination sometimes, whether that is mental walking or physical walking. Put one foot in front of the other. Build something with your hands. Let your child climb on something carefully. Go outside, get some sunlight. Learn how to filter water. Read physical books and read them cover to cover. Stay up late finishing one every now and again for funsies. Try to comprehend as much of the cover to cover experience as you can. Recall it. Write book reports. Right? Let your child watch you do all of these things because they're not just hobbies. They're acts of self-authorship. They're acts of rebellion to a system designed to make you permanently dependent on it when you are perfectly designed to be the author of your own story by God. The system wants you to be a worker. God wants you to be a creator. The battle is between the two. It is impressed upon us to remain as workers. It is how we follow principle to become creators. The only way to win is to stop waiting for the authority figure to tell you it's okay to start. At the end of the day, you are the observer, and the story is yours. So write it. With that being said, good people, thank you very much for tuning in to today's episode and presentation of the Inner Storyteller. I would love to hear what you guys are thinking, see what you guys are saying in the comments. So please, first, before you type a comment, like the video, please subscribe to the channels. And just know that, again, if you're here on this channel, then you're in for real conversations. We talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the great. We talk about religion, we talk about money, we talk about anarchy. We talk about how and why and when and who and what, how the mind of the masses is manipulated by forces that do not have our best interests at heart. And, oh, my wife said I got a rap for y'all. Okay, let's share some bars. Let's spit some bars for the people real quick. And then we'll call it a day. I don't have all of my lyrics memorized in my head, ready to go. So I do have to pull up, where is keep notes? There we go. my little keep notes. Boom, shaka, laka, lock, dee. Man, I haven't written bars in a minute. Let me see. Okay. Goodness. Oh, okay, here we go. Here's something. Headed towards 183, I merge with the lane. Get my mental notebook out and encourage the flame. Concurrently turn and burn rubber on Ferguson Lane. It occurred to me my mental world was dirty and lame. Till I turned to God and learnt with him I'm worthy, and surely it came the moment of truth when the same circumstances had to test this new worthy version of this burdened new man. First turned conservative like estimates on my own currency gained. Instagram clips of Candace, Charlie Kirk, and the gang, they all worked on my brain. And then Thomas Sowell put a hurting on the words of my pain, because it wasn't real and I was wrong and ashamed to admit. But conservatives didn't get me to gain what I set out to gain. Like a train off the grid, I tracked truth beyond Whitney Webb when she wrote the truth about the flag on the play. Kind of blew the whistle on their ass in a way. And Israel became a catalyst. Wait, Israel may come and try to drag us away into a place with real demons with no mask on their face, but I just key blast them away. And I bask in the faith of a mustard seed just to take the path and escape the slave hive mind and see the cage clearly, because free-range chickens still being maimed. Dear we the people, we are equal to the rulers. In fact, they just regular people who use computers to hack your thought patterns. Plasticity in your brain is a tool they utilize to neutralize your mental plane and its fuel. They euthanize the youth with lies, and given the tools to use your mind, they'll truly pry you from your soul, and they'll truly pry your soul from your body and make you AI. To euphemize the cruel demise, they'll call it medicine. And the proof is lies till truth is lies, and you a lie, until we stand up to the guys that do this wild shit. But what do I know? But what indeed do I know? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Soul Expression. Please like the video, subscribe to the channels, comment something useful, or something not useful, argue with me. I don't know. Say something, give a hug. Okay. It's all family. It's all love here. And I'll see y'all on Monday for the next one. Peace.